Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I want to talk about what happens later in the Rising of the Shield hero for the demi-human kid named Keel, who Naofumi and Raphtalia rescued in Season 1. Keel actually has a big surprise in store, and I will be spoiling it, along with some other plot lines from the light novels, so turn back now if you don't want to see any spoilers. If you're still here, please consider subscribing, as I'll be making plenty more Shield hero content throughout Season 2, and it really helps me out if you do. So, as we've seen in the anime, Keel becomes a resident of Naofumi's village after being rescued. There are some differences between the anime and light novels with what we've seen of this so far though. In the anime, Naofumi gets the village a couple of arcs earlier than in the light novels, and I've already discussed that in my video about Season 1 changes, so I'm not going to go into it again, but the main difference for Keel is that in the light novels, the training that takes place before the spirit tortoise appears is done at the castle rather than the village, though Keel is still participating. A bigger difference is that as part of this, Keel became Naofumi's slave at the same time as Yuusha. Keel was very willing to do this, because due to Naofumi unlocking some skills relating to raising slaves and monsters, anyone who forms a slave contract with Naofumi gets big bonuses to their stats, helping them to get stronger. This is also the reason Naofumi wanted Yuusha to become a slave, which I don't think was made clear enough in the anime, as a lot of people are still asking about it. Other than with Raphtalia at the start though, the reason why Naofumi forms slave contracts with his allies is to give them these advantages. And because the slave contracts are magic and he can choose the settings, he doesn't include anything that forces them to do anything in particular. It's more him kind of exploiting a mechanic at that point, and given neither Keel nor Yuusha are purchased as slaves, and they enter into it willingly, it isn't really much to do with slavery at this point at all. It's kind of Naofumi being pragmatic and using everything he has available that might help him, including sketchier things like the slave mechanics that he gained access to in a much darker period of his time in this world. Keel wants to get strong like Raphtalia and to be useful, so is very enthusiastic about getting the slave crest, compared with Yuusha, who isn't sure about the shield hero yet, having just come over from the bow heroes party, but who does also want to get stronger. Now, I think the reason why Keel becoming a slave was skipped in the anime is because while Keel does start to level and train with the others, when they first start fighting the familiars of the spirit tortoise, Keel gets an injury and is out of the party recovering while the rest of them fight the spirit tortoise itself, and then end up going over to Glass's world in pursuit of the guy who was controlling it. Since Keel wasn't going to be involved in a lot of the scenes and isn't in the next arc, and since the character had already been introduced in Season 1, they probably decided that where they were skipping a lot of the training stuff anyway, they'd also leave things like Keel becoming a slave and leveling up until a later arc, where there would be more opportunity to show it paying off. So, the surprising reveal about Keel comes once Naofumi has expanded his village to include a lot more of the demi-humans who had originally lived there, and had been sold as slaves when Keel and Raphtalia were. There is a whole arc in a country called Zeltobel involving getting these people back, and this introduces an important character called Sedina, who was actually mentioned in a conversation between Keel and Raphtalia in Season 1. Sedina definitely deserves her own video, so I won't talk about her in too much detail here, but she is a demi-human who can use a form called a therianthrope form, as well as the mostly human-looking forms we see other demi-humans like Raphtalia and Keel in so far. Therianthrope forms look like, well, basically furries. They look like anthropomorphized animals. Some demi-humans are always in therianthrope forms, whereas others are always in the more tails and ears but otherwise human forms. Sedina though, well, the type of beast person she is based on an orca or killer whale. So in her humanoid form, she just has some patterns of black orca-like skin on her body, but in her therianthrope form, she is like an orca with arms and legs. She also later becomes able to use a full beast form, when she can actually turn into a massive killer whale that can swim through the air, and this ability to transform into beast mode will become relevant to Keel later. In any case, Sedina had previously been kind of a big sister to Raphtalia and Keel, as she's older than they are. She's 23. There's a lot more to her than I'm talking about here because I'm trying to keep on topic with Keel, but look out for a full video all about her if you want to know more, because she is one of my favourite characters in the series. Now, once Sedina has joined the village, which is by the sea, everyone decides to go swimming, and people notice something about Keel, who's been levelling up, and so has started to mature quickly. Keel is actually a girl. Now, normally in an anime, a character we thought was a boy turning out to be a girl will be because the character was disguising themselves, like Dororo, or because the character never said they were a boy, and it was just an incorrect assumption people had made based on their clothes or appearance. But in Keel's case, Keel herself didn't actually know the difference between boys and girls, and had been assuming she was a boy based on misunderstanding something her father had said. Being a child, there hadn't been much difference between boys and girls for her anyway so far in life, and she didn't know how biology worked, basically thinking she'd grow a penis at some point. She is as surprised as Naofumi when she's told she is in fact maturing into a young woman. Now, there are different ways this could be taken, and so I'm going to talk briefly about that here before anyone gets all Twitter about it. I'm going to refer to Keel as she for the rest of the video because that's what Naofumi does in the English translations of the light novel, but I'm not even sure myself whether the author here intended Keel to be trans, so Keel's belief that she's male is actually correct, and she's in a body that doesn't feel right to her once she learns it's a female body, or whether Keel's gender confusion is more just a product of the way demi-humans age quickly when they level up. So whether it's just highlighting how weird it would be to go from being a child, where stuff like that doesn't matter and you haven't really learned anything about how adult bodies work yet, to having an adult body almost overnight. Keel having to suddenly get used to being a woman because of the fast levelling and the fact that demi-humans who go through this don't get the same arc through puberty that everyone else does is certainly interesting for the character, and does address something about the whole demi-human aging thing that would otherwise feel like it was being glossed over a bit. The fact that it probably is a bit weird for some people to rapidly mature. Raphtalia, who was a serious and mature child before it happened to her, didn't really have that issue. But Keel is very different, still being a very playful and innocent character in the way she's written after she's leveled up a lot. Now, I prefer to go with the interpretation that Keel isn't trans and doesn't actually mind being a girl once she gets used to the idea, because she is treated as a girl by Naofumi and the others after this moment, and I feel like the author probably didn't intend to write a scenario where the protagonist and everyone else is being kind of transphobic and forcing a trans man into living as a woman. It just doesn't really go with the way Naofumi is written to be someone who doesn't really care about things like gender and race when it comes to his allies, something that is literally stated as being a trait that all S.H.I.E.L.D. heroes have. I feel like the interpretation that Keel is trans makes a lot of the stuff that happens around her dark in a way that I don't think was intended, whereas the interpretation that she was just a kid who didn't know the difference between boys and girls and who was surprised by what she grew into is kind of cute, funny, and also works from a world-building point of view to show us more about demi-humans. So that to me seems more like what the author was doing, especially given Keel is positioned as an especially lovable character, but also often the butt of Naofumi's jokes. There is a depth to Keel's role in the story, and I'll come to that in a minute, but she is often comic relief, and I don't think that type of character would be the one the author would use if they were trying to present some kind of dark situation around how trans people are viewed in this setting, or around Naofumi being intolerant about only that one type of person. Still, this isn't one of those cases where it is definitively said in the story one way or another how Keel feels about it, given it's written in the first person from Naofumi's perspective, so we only know what she says and does, and what he thinks about her. So if there are people who prefer to think Keel is written as trans and like that interpretation of the character, then I don't think we can completely dismiss that as headcanon either. So it's a bit different to things like the debates around Felix from ReZero, which I've made a couple of videos about if you're interested in that. In any case, the interpretation that Keel does feel uncomfortable about her maturing body is definitely there either way. Because Keel, not long after this, learns the ability to transform into her own therianthrope form, which resembles a Siberian husky puppy, and she spends a lot of her time in that form, preferring it to her humanoid one. The fact that she looks like a puppy, and nobody really cares whether a puppy is a boy or a girl, means she can avoid the awkwardness of looking more grown up than she probably feels in her humanoid form, and the puppy form suits her personality, as she's generally quite hyper, cheerful, and affectionate. She spends so much time in this form that she kind of becomes a mascot character for the village, which is quite an achievement considering there are all kinds of cute monsters and philo there. For a while, most of what we'll see with Keel is in the more slice of life type parts of the story, centred around the village, with her being a key figure there and working hard to get stronger, but not happening to be in the party for any of the major plot lines. That is, until the current arc of the light novels, which sees the entire village being sent back in time to the era of the previous shield hero. This leads to some very significant developments in terms of the main story around who's behind the waves and what the meaning of them is, but that's stuff for another video. What's most relevant here is that this is when we get a lot of development for Keel. As far back as the very first arc, we saw that Raphtalia had to get over a fear of Cerberus type monsters, as that was what killed her parents. During what should have been some run-of-the-mill levelling up that Keel was along for during this arc in the past, Keel encounters this type of dog monster and also experiences some severe PTSD. This leads Naofumi to realise that many of the people in his village probably share this trauma, because he'd populated the village mostly with people who had originally lived there before it was attacked by that very first wave. He tries to find a way to help those who want to beat their fears to get over them, and the therapy that they come up with is for Raphtalia to use illusion magic to interfere with their dreams, allowing them to experience more positive outcomes in facing the dog monsters in those dreams. But while this works for some, Keel doesn't really find that it helps. She feels better inside of her dream, but when she wakes up, none of it was real, and so it doesn't really feel like it's changed anything. She decides she wants to take a different path to overcoming her fears and getting stronger, because she really wants to be useful to everybody, especially Naofumi, who she looks up to and has been calling Bubba affectionately since she first came to the village. At this time, there are a couple of mad alchemist type characters around. One is Ratotille, who joined Naofumi's village in an earlier arc, and the other, who is named Holn, is actually her ancestor from that time period, and she's also the whip vassal weapon holder of that time. I know that all raises a bunch of questions, but I'm going to keep it high level here to stay on topic with Keel. Holn is able to offer Keel a different way to deal with her issues, and they conspire to do this without the knowledge of Naofumi, Raphtalia, and the others. When Naofumi eventually manages to find out what's going on and reach Holn and Keel in Ratotille's alchemy lab, he finds that Holn has a way to modify Keel and actually turn her into a Cerberus herself, giving her the power of the thing she fears the most. In an emotional scene, Holn lets Keel try out the Cerberus form as a one-off, but by talking to Naofumi, Keel realises she doesn't want to risk being in that form permanently and declines the modification. However, later in one of the final major battles of the currently available light novels, it is discovered that using his beast shield, which can support demi-humans using their beast forms, like Sedina, who I mentioned earlier using her killer whale form, Naofumi can now support Keel using the Cerberus form as her own beast mode. The light novel has left us in the middle of this arc while it's been on hiatus, with the author working on the reprise of the Spear Hero, so we'll have to wait to see how Keels' story will continue, but let me know in the comments what you think about this extremely likeable member of the cast. Thanks as always to my supporters on Patreon, and to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thanks for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.